Welcome to Soul Sessions. I'm Amanda Rieger Green, your host. Today we have a special guest, George Noory. If you know who he is, he needs no introduction. But for those of you who might be unfamiliar, he is the host of the phenomenally successful, nationally syndicated Coast to Coast AM radio show, heard on more than 600 stations in North America. He's also the host of the weekly series Beyond Belief on the Gaia Network. George continually captivates audiences in thought-provoking discussions with top experts on paranormal phenomena, alternate realities, time travel, conspiracies, aliens, and all things unexplained. He's authored numerous books on topics around spiritual enlightenment, human empowerment, unlocking unlimited potential and happiness, and more. More than anything, he's driven by a desire to solve the great mysteries of our time, and he likes covering stories that mainstream media usually won't touch. He's my kind of guy, and I'm a huge fan. Welcome, George.
Amanda, what a great introduction. I should have you do that on Coast to Coast regularly for me.
Well, I'm happy to be your understudy on Coast to Coast, George. So if you need one, you have a willing participant. I'm happy to come on and introduce you anytime. And I mentioned this to you before we started recording. I've been listening to you on Coast to Coast since the early 2000s and Art Bell before that. I can remember sitting in my car listening to Art in, the late 90s as a teenager, and I would be driving home from something and I would stay in the driveway in the car listening and fascinated. And that, of course, continued and continues today. I do it when I listen to Coast podcast and just the excerpts from Coast to Coast when I'm commuting places. And it really is my time to engage, get curious, and also learn about people doing really phenomenally interesting things that focus on the unexplained and creating explanations. One of the things, George, that I love about your discussions on Coast to Coast and Beyond Belief and the other places you've been featured is what an amazing listener you are. I know that this is what you do and you've done this for years, but it feels like to me, and I notice this in your energy field, when you interview people, you listen empathically. I mean, you're very in tune, connected, you're patient with people, you're curious with people, no matter what the subject matter. And you always make people feel welcome in a very gracious way. Tell me a little bit about your listening skills. I feel like, I can talk for hours, and I know, we have one mouth and two ears, but I feel like you listen intuitively. Do you feel like that's a gift you've had since you were younger, or is it cultivated? Tell me a little bit about that.
My parents taught me, Amanda, just to listen to people when they talk and then respond to them rather than interrupt them, jump on them and do that. And I get this now time and time again from our listeners who send me emails after various shows and interviews. They simply say, gosh, you're a great listener. There was even an article written in a journal years ago. I think it was The Atlantic. The title on the top of the article was The Listener. And it's just important to listen to people, to find out what they're talking about, what their views are on life, without interrupting them, without jumping all over them. And I have learned a long time ago that that's the best kind of radio you can do. And so that's what I do for people. I try to help some people along who can't talk. Some people stumble. Some people are nervous. I get a lot of those, but I try to interject then to kind of pull them along with me. But by and large, the guests who are talking, who know what they're talking about, I let them talk.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. And I think, too, in your energy field, part of maybe your soul's purpose and development is really to bring out people's intelligence, again, I go back to that word curiosity, and in a way that is approachable and gets other people, the listener, engaged with their whole being as well. Because I find myself, and I through meditation and various practices, and also learning to just slow down, because we move 95 miles an hour oftentimes these days. But when I slow down and I really listen, not just with my ears, but with my heart, my consciousness, I find myself doing that. And it's a talent. And I encourage anyone out there who is not familiar with Coast to Coast, apart from examining and exploring new topics that are really becoming more mainstream, also really recognizing the energy that transpires in your interviews. And that's what I wanted to point out. Would you share with us a little bit about how you first became intrigued about the unexplained?
I was 11 years old. My mother gave me a book called We Are Not Alone. It was by the late New York Times science writer Walter Sullivan. And I just couldn't put it down. I was obsessed with it. And then the Barney and Betty Hill abduction case came out. You remember that? Look magazine did something on that. And then I had an out-of-body experience. I was stayed home from school, one of the rare times I didn't go. And I woke up on the ceiling looking down at my body. And I went, my gosh, what's going on here? And then I rammed myself back into my body. I went to the library and stumbled into Astral projection, read it, and said, that's what happened to me. And I was hooked. And I kept telling my mother, who would encourage me, and she, God love her, she's 94 years old today. I kept telling her, I want to investigate these stories, whatever they are, ghosts, UFOs, supernatural things. And the best way for me to do that is to become a broadcaster. And so at that young age, I knew what I wanted to do. Now, my father had different plans for me. He wanted me to become a dentist like all the other relatives in my family. He was a financial analyst for the Ford Motor Company, but my cousins were all endodontists and dentists. And he said, George, I want you to go to the University of Detroit and be a dentist. So for 2 years, I did that in college, bored out of my mind. I had a friend of mine who was a broadcast major. He was in his second year of broadcasting, and he said, I'm working at a TV station, and they won't let me go home for Christmas. He lived in Cleveland. I was in Detroit at the time. He said, would you fill in for me? And if you do, they'll let me go. And I said, okay, sure. So I did it for 2 weeks. And they loved it, and they decided to keep me and him. And then I went back and switched my major to broadcasting. Didn't tell my father about it. The report cards from college would always go to him because he helped pay down the bill. He called me into his room one day and said, George, sit down for a second. We got a problem here. And I said, what, Dad? What's wrong? He said, well, I got your report card, but it's the wrong person. And I said, what do you mean it's the wrong person? He said, well, there are no dentist courses and science courses or any of those. I'm getting all these broadcast courses. Whoever this guy is, he's doing great. He's getting A's in radio production, speech, all this stuff. But we got the wrong report card. I said, Dad, I switched my major. He said, what? Dad, I switched my major. He wouldn't talk to me for 2 months. Except one day he was watching that television news station that I was working at. And he saw my name pop up at the end of the credits, production assistant, George Noory. I came home, he was awake. I got home, and it was quarter to midnight. News ran at 11 p.m. in Detroit in those days. They still do. He was waiting up for me, and he said, did I just see your name on that television station? And I said, yeah, Dad, that's what I'm doing while I'm going to college. He said, wow, that's fantastic. Well, when are you going to be the producer? And that started my career, and he loved it ever since.
That's amazing. And first of all, I love how supportive your parents are. And I was very fortunate in that too, but also have some similarities around, I switched a major. I was supposed to be, quote unquote, a physician. I come from a long line of folks in the medical field, and I had an awakening and an epiphany in undergrad, and dropped my biology and pre-med track and became a religion major, religion, theology. I loved my humanities courses because it taught me to think critically, but I had to have that same dialogue about, I don't think I want to become a doctor. It changed the course of my life, those difficult discussions, but ultimately my parents supported me. One thing that you're speaking to that resonates is Synchronicities and following the breadcrumbs, at age 11. And of course, you and I both know 11 is a master number, the interconnection of the human and the spiritual worlds and planes. So to have that at age 11, profound connection with the book, We Are Not Alone, and then your out of body experience, and then going to the library, picking up the book on astral projection, and then all the other series of events that you described, it's as if there's this divine orchestration of things. And while we have free will, I believe that it's like if we pick up the breadcrumbs, if we follow the signs, it's like The Alchemist. Did you ever read that book, The Alchemist?
I did not, no.
You haven't read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I might be pronouncing his name incorrectly. It's a quick read. It's a fictional book, but it's all about just following the breadcrumbs, and it has a little bit of a hero's journey element to it where the right people show up in the right scenarios and situations. I think you would enjoy it. But it just reminds me that the universe is always striving to create this cohesion with us. But it's our opportunity or job or role to engage. Do you believe that?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, It's almost if it's God-given, but we do have this innate ability to do what we have to do. It's ingrained in us. It's been with us since we were kids. That's when it starts. And I always tell parents, maximize your child's abilities of what they like to do. Don't try to get in the way. Don't spoil things. Enhance what they're doing, because at that young age, when I was 11 years old, and it probably even started earlier than that, these things started with me, this interest, and it never went away. And I'm just fortunate my parents encouraged me in terms of what I was doing, especially my mother.
Yes. And I had similar experiences, different, but the same kind of nurturing and encouragement for me to explore who I was. It took a long time to really recognize gifts and talents, innate abilities and talents, and really to speak my own truth rather than conforming. I'm a Libra, by the way. So, we tend to wax towards people pleasing.
And I'm a Gemini.
Well, air signs unite. We have those tendencies, but to be able to, utilize our diplomacy and our tact and harmony, but also really stand in our own voice and courageous truth. And that is something that you do often with your guest and in the arenas which you explore.
The coolest way to get through the summer heat is with a $69 AC tune-up from Vernon, the heating and cooling specialist. $69 to make sure your air conditioning is working at peak cooling. Vernon, the heating and cooling specialist. The name says it all, because when you focus only on heating and cooling for 43 years, well, you get really good at it. And summer heat is when Vernon can show you how good with their $69 AC tune-up. Vernon, the heating and cooling specialist. Online at vernonheating.com.
Let me ask you this, and I'm thinking about this as we're talking, and you're talking about parenting and children and nurturing their ability to seek their own truth. Time to me is really shifting. I feel like, and I can give examples of this, that we have linear time and multidimensional time, and it seems to be crisscrossing and intertwining. And I give the example of thinking about when the iPhone was released and the smartphone in 2007, and how technology just keeps compounding, where once you buy something, it's obsolete. We can't even keep up with the technology. Time feels that way. It slows and speeds up. And even since the pandemic, it feels like we have portals of time or fissures through trauma and global change attributed to many things. But it feels like to me, we have this linear time and multidimensional time that are starting to intertwine. Do you find that, or have you had guests on where you've talked about linear and multidimensional time and the changing nature of our reality? And the reason I bring that back to parenting, where you can see my trajectory is, because I think children being born today are born into a more rapidly expanding cosmos energy field. Some of their gifts might be more predominant than yours or mine, more active DNA or brain frequencies or abilities. So parenting more than ever is imperative around cultivating consciousness and new ways of learning and being. But what do you find about time these days? Are you seeing some similarities in how it feels in this point in time?
Amanda, time just doesn't slow down. It just keeps going. We've had a number of guests on talking about time and things like that. And I don't want to say the older we get, the faster time goes, but it just doesn't slow down. I mean, here we are in August already. I mean,
right.
Where did the year go? It just keeps buzzing along. So that's one thing I've learned about time. Make the best you can right now. Don't put things off. Don't delay things, and just do what you have to do, because the clock just doesn't stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as parenting goes and children being born today, and I know you've had guests on who have talked about children who are star seeds and, different categories of children, but do you find too, with the nature of young people, I mean, we can see the differences in the generations, especially the generations that don't remember what it was like to have a tape player or an 8-track or a phone hanging on the wall with a long cord in the kitchen. All of those things that are very clear to me, they're born into different time and technology. But as far as nurturing new generations and parenting, how do you feel that as humans, as individuals, we have opportunities to cultivate people, young people today?
Well, young people are fortunate because they've got high technology all the time now. And I've seen little kids, 5, 6 years old, with smartphones, their parents' smartphones. I don't think it's theirs, not yet anyway. I mean, they just know how to do things. They know how to do video games. They know how to text. They know how to do all kinds of stuff. And they will become smarter than we were at that age because of technology. People are afraid of artificial intelligence. I don't think we should be afraid of it. I think we should embrace it because it teaches us smarter things to do. And young little kids are getting this ability. They're much better than we were when we were kids, and it's going to get better and better and better for them. And I think that's great and hopeful for our future.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, there are plenty of arguments around artificial intelligence. And I've been diving into that on my own because I have questions about it, but learning to work alongside of it ethically, looking at the ethical and legal ramifications, being able to have those conversations, address those challenges or issues, and then the opportunities is so important. And then on the flip side of that, I think about children today. I mean, I rode my bike all the time, and it's where I used my imagination, getting outside and playing. And so finding the balance between sometimes the screen time, and that's a whole other topic, but that comes to mind. Tell me this, speaking of topics, there are a wealth of fascinating dialogues in the mainstream around the unexplained and technology and UFOs, all sorts of information, or forbidden knowledge, as Billy Carson would put it. What do you find most fascinating and piquing your curiosity these days?
I got to tell you, man, and this is not a cop-out here, but I'm fascinated with everything.
I knew you were going to say that, George. I knew it.
I mean, everything interests me, whether, I do shows on hard news shows on the mafia trying to kill Castro, to supernatural events and out-of-body experiences and life after death and UFOs and all this stuff. It all fascinates me. It's all different. It keeps me thinking. It keeps me wondering. And I can't single one out. There isn't one thing that I like more than the other. I like them all.
I love that. And I'm not surprised that that is your response, because it comes across that way. And so much of your gift is opening up people's minds, sharing knowledge, sharing people's expertise. And we have so many scientific, technological experts and metaphysical, gurus and seekers and people who are leading and sharing information and their gifts and talents in new ways. So much of it to me is about tapping into unaccessed human potential and harnessing our gifts and abilities to be better stewards of humanity, of the planet. And that makes me think about, lifetimes, various lifetimes that we've lived, the karma or the energy we come in with. That relates a lot to the work that I do. I have a company called Soul Pathology, and so much of utilizing my gifts as a claircognizant and precognitive psychic medium is to look at the different pathways, the pathos to disease, mental challenges, blockages we have, the emotional body, emotional intelligence, our physical body, the actual physical dense matter, dis-ease, and then the energetic body, which could be our souls, our consciousness, looking at our karma, and how do we create healing pathways in order to access our human and superhuman potential and to enjoy life. So much of it is about astounding ourselves with our own abilities and sharing those gifts. Do you find that
you have this great ability yourself, and you have this gift to be able to do what you do, and to answer what you're about to ask me, I'm very much like you in terms of high energy, health-related issues, using your own personal being to make yourself better. And I try to get that to other people too. There's nothing more depressing to me than seeing somebody who doesn't utilize their God-given talents within themselves to make themselves better. I was reading a story today about the late Robin Williams and, the fact that he hung himself, committed suicide. The demons that he had in him from his disease was horrible. It's so unfortunate he wasn't able to capture that and turn his life around, because he was one of the great talents of all times.
Absolutely. And, George, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I've been in recovery now for quite a long time, over a decade. And I was a high functioning alcoholic addict. I'm a need for speed overachiever. And you can imagine where those proclivities took me, with that drive, needing to just relax, numb out. And at some point, there's an analogy, when you turn a cucumber into a pickle, it can't go back to being a cucumber. So at some point, I crossed that line with the disease of addiction and alcoholism. But for the grace of God, had the gift of desperation, one of my favorite acronyms for God, gift of desperation, and said, I can't do this. I need help. And it propelled me on this journey to develop my gifts. But interestingly, in my darkest phase, about 2.5, 3 years, I would wake up in the middle of the night or go into some sort of blackout state. And I could have been a full day at work. I was in healthcare, have a productive day, show up, perform, enjoy what I was doing, and then come home. And it would be like Jekyll and Hyde, another personality. But I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would channel very dark energy. And I would do it extremely articulately and emphatically. And it scared my mother and other people in my life at that time. And it was almost as if by the end, and I really do believe, like you were referencing, some of us are lucky enough to live to tell the tale and then get to know real gratitude, what it is to really live life on life's terms and utilize our gifts, share our gifts with others, open up gifts in other people. But I remember towards the end, it was almost like I had entity possession. And that's where soul pathology emerged, because it was like all of my immune systems were depleted mentally, emotionally, physically, but energetically. And so I was susceptible to, who knows, all sorts of energetic hitchhikers that were starting to really invade or pervade my whole being and body. And I believe it was, God, the divine, and my soul, my guides, however you want to look at it, just pulling me up, saying, no, you were destined for something more. Fight this, fight for yourself. And, a series of people and all of the synchronicities just congregated around me. And I started accepting help and learning and growing and healing and clearing my vessel. Again, not just getting sober in my body, but in my mind, working through old pain, old trauma to really clarify my voice. And when I did that, George, all of a sudden, my gifts that I had had since a young age and that came out in this really dark, heavy matter, in my addiction and alcoholism started to spring forth of the light and a clarity and a higher consciousness. And, I've heard this in the recovery community for years. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic or addict. And years ago, I didn't understand that so much. But today it's like, gosh, if this was the pathway I took to open up to my voice, my higher voice, and to use it to impact others, make a difference, then it was all worth it. None of it was in vain. Of course, there have been plenty of amends and things years ago that I had to atone for. And doing that work was part of the soul pathology, the cleaning of the vessel, and that self-improvement, self-development, which is what you essentially, when I ask you what you were curious about, it's, this continuing to develop, to evolve, to grow ourselves, to seek knowledge and wisdom, to find deeper meaning. Do you feel that it's about meaning?
It's about a lot of things, and meaning is important too. And it sounds like in your particular case, you saved your life when you finally realized you needed to step up and fix whatever demons you had within you to keep pushing you and doing what you do. It's easy for people like me to say to people like you, oh, just moderation, just take one or two drinks and just stop. But you can't. You have this inner drive, this inner addiction, and thank God you were able to stop it when you did, or else who knows what kind of path you would have been on.
Absolutely. So I'm grateful today, and it's just a part of my own personal development, spiritual development, and it's interesting that pathway is what really opened me up to greater consciousness and gifts and awareness. I mean, the proclivity and the curiosity was always there, but it solidified it as part of my story and part of my meaning. One of the things I do want to talk to you about, which is interesting, which I know you discuss often, is UFOs. I've had multiple encounters with UFOs and in various locations here in Texas, in the greater Austin area.
With sightings, or have you been abducted?
I have not been abducted to my knowledge, although I don't know. I've had some out-of-body experiences where I will wake up some mornings, George, and I will have bruises or my body will be sore in places and there's no logical explanation. And I've been sober. So it's this is, coming from a place of pure logic and honesty. I will wake up and it's almost as if I have been somewhere else. So there is that, but I don't have direct memories of that. But I've had sightings. The first time I ever had a sighting was probably in 2014, and I was just outside of Austin, and we had a couple acres, and so you could see the night sky pretty well. And I remember looking up at the stars like I used to do most nights, and I looked up at what I thought was a star, and as I stared and my eyes began to focus, it wasn't a star. It was moving in all sorts of directions, almost like in a very strange geometric pattern at a very rapid pace. And then there were lights, red, yellow, green, purple, blue, spinning very quickly. And it would come close and it would go far. And when I say close, I don't mean it landed in the yard and it was right there for me to encounter. It was still, I don't know exactly how to explain the distance, but it was still off in the distance as if it was a craft, and it was not a plane. There was not a linear flight pattern. So I would go outside at night and engage, and then I would see 2 or 3 or 4, and they would all appear at varying distances, some farther away than others. And specifically, I remember I lived in Belize for 3 years. And so, of course, we had a dark night sky and 3G technology. So the sky and the radio frequencies were different. The property we lived on, we found this out later. It used to be the graveyard. It was the highest point in our village. And then come to find out there were Mayan ruins, of course, deep under the house that some archaeologists had recognized doing some seismic graphing and whatnot. So, of course, I'm just on this hotbed of energy anyway. And then we're in Belize. The sky is dark. And they would come much closer to our house. But I remember I had been in continuous dialogue and really with my telepathy, communicating with them. What is it that you're here to do? And they were benevolent. I knew that they were curious, that they were wanting to share information and technology, curious about what was going on planet Earth. They felt safe in that part of the sky, in that area, in whatever dialogue it was with me. But I remember one evening, and I had been contemplating this, thinking, okay, are they coming back to study us? And then I had this concept in my mind, George, that the ships, let's just call them, the ones that were closer were like, these cruise ships. And these were the people that had paid for the Viking cruise. And these other ones might have been on Carnival or, celebrity cruises. And not to throw shade at any of the cruises, but you know what I'm saying? Like either people bought the VIP experience because they could, and then other ones were farther away. And I had been contemplating that and asking them, and they had confirmed that. And I was like, they're just exploring us. They're visiting. They want to connect and share information. And then I was listening to Coast one evening, and you had a dialogue with Dr. Michael Masters. He's a biological professor of anthropology. It had just aired whenever that was. And I happened to come across that episode, and he was talking about how he thinks that we have these, visitors that are like cultural anthropologists. They're coming in as anthropologists. And he basically articulated from a much more informed anthropological, biological perspective. I mean, I think he's written books on it, in fact. But he essentially, again, one of those synchronicities, it was validated. And those are the kind of things, George, where just like you shared at the beginning about you getting that book and then you having the out of body and then getting curious to go to the library. It's like when we engage, the answers come, and I don't have to question or know all the answers. It's just a knowing. So
there's no question about it. And, you were astute enough to pick up on it a long time ago. And it's just fascinating what's going on in this universe of ours. I have yet to have a physicist or scientist or astrology expert or anybody explain to me the Big Bang of the universe, how it started. Nobody knows. And they try to make up their explanations. They try to come up with their theories, but nobody's been able to satisfy me, giving me the answer of how something as vast as this universe started from nothing. Nobody has the answer, except I think my mother might be right, even though I question her, because I've asked her about it, and she said, well, God started it. And I said, well, who started God? And she said, He always was and always will be. And I said, Mom, I want a better answer than that. And she said, that's as good as you're going to get. But it makes you wonder, how did it all happen? How did it start? Because once we get those answers, we'll be able to, I think, explain a lot of things that are happening to us.
Absolutely. I remember coming home from vacation Bible school, let's say it maybe, 6 years old. And I said, Mom, this 7-day creation thing, I just don't get it, because when did the dinosaurs happen? And I mean, and she said, well, God has this supreme ability and it's beyond our comprehension. Yes, but I need to understand the order of things and how all of this fits in, and she said, some of these things are unexplainable. And I said, but are they? And so it's that same interest and asking questions. It's not about dogma, right or wrong. It's about exploring the gray and getting excited through the exploration. That lights my fire. I know it does yours, but it's that exploration and not having a closed mind, because there's so much for us to question and not to, sure, we can criticize or stand on one side or the other. And that's what sometimes can be so disheartening is, with politics, how it doesn't seem like we have this bipartisanship. It seems like it's right or left. There's the dialogue, the middle ground, the dissertation, the healthy debate just seems to be very polarized. So I think now more than ever, encouraging people to not only develop their intuition, their abilities to listen and ask questions, but they're encouraging people to expand their consciousness. And that's so much of what you do and why I'm excited to have had this conversation with you today. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I know you're going to evade it with your big, broad answer, but I mean, if you can just hone in on something, I would love it. I mean, your energy field, if I may, one of the most beautiful things about you is how introspective you are. I mean, in your quiet time, they show me very clearly that you love connecting the dots. You can be reading a fiction book or listening to something totally unassuming or unrelated on a television program or having a dialogue with something, and all of a sudden you connect the dots and have those transcendent aha moments. Does that resonate?
It does. It does. Yeah. I love looking for answers to the unknown, and I love thinking about possibilities. And when I'm frustrated because I don't have an answer, I keep fighting until I get it, and I don't stop. I don't stop.
So you have shared some of this, but does a particular interview or person who has been extremely influential to you who has altered some of your beliefs or help you in your own meaning, your own seeking and searching? Is there anyone who stands out to you that you felt like has been a pretty prominent guide or mentor? And I know that you get a multitude of people who enliven and enlighten you, but are there any people that have been great heroes of yours in this area, especially directing people for things to explore that they might be interested in?
Heroes, I admire all our guests who come on the program to talk about their various subject matter. But There was one guest that I had on, which was the strangest episode I've ever had. His name was Benjamin Krem. He's dead now. He represented what is called the Lord Maitreya. A lot of people believe the Lord Maitreya was next Antichrist. That's what they believe. And I was interviewing him, and we're looking at our emails during commercial breaks, and I'm getting emails 10 times more than I normally get at any particular show from people saying, please get him off the air. I feel sick. I'm going, this is weird. And I continued interviewing him, and all of a sudden, I never get sick, Amanda, never. I'm starting to feel queasy and weak. The more I'm interviewing him, the more he's draining me. And I finally ended the interview, and we went to open lines. I started feeling better, and the emails came in. I feel so much better now. Thank you. It was by far the strangest guest I've ever had, and I still can't figure it out.
Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. But to me, what's even more fascinating than figuring out what energy he was hosting is it shows us how frequencies and energy, we don't have to be face to face to be susceptible to absorbing energy, which is one of the things
it's wireless. It's wireless somehow.
Absolutely. It's the internet and the internet. It is all a web of energy, which is one of the things that I promote with people and help them with in getting clear in their energy field and the importance of, our overall health and well-being, but our energetic health, our mental health, all of those faculties together really help us safeguard our energy. And I don't love the word protect because it kind of denotes you need protecting from something. It's just saying, I am safe, I'm clear. And we can do that in an instant, just like technology, energy can be transmitted in a quantum speed that we don't even understand. It's unfathomable. It's fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. So interesting. I feel like I'm going to have to do some research, but there's something about his energy that obviously it was like some kind of kryptonite.
He was like a psychic vampire.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, thank you so much for taking time and joining me today. I hope everyone will check out Coast to Coast AM, fall in love with it like I have for many years on iHeartRadio and then Beyond Belief on the Gaia Network to engage the incredible and interesting discussions with George Noory and his guest. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Amanda. It was a pleasure.
With a Planet Fitness Black Card, you don't just get a great workout, you get a great perk out because your membership is packed with perks. Join for just $1 down and $24.99 a month.
Join the judgment-free zone today. Deal ends Thursday, August 10th.
See Home Club for details.